Over in the land of Awa arose a priest who criticised Ninsho and his coziness with the government. And he criticised not only the religious beliefs and practices of Ninsho's Shingon sect, but of almost all Buddhist sects, and declared they would bring about Japan's destruction. This apocalyptic message was delivered by a man who called himself Nichiren, Lotus of the Sun. Nichiren was born to fisherfolk in Awa in 1222, and despite his humble background, he was noticed as something of a prodigy, and he entered a monastery aged 11. Aged 15, he visited Kamakura for the first time to study with the great sages of his day, crossing back to Awa aged 19 to formulate his first doctrines. He returned to Kamakura briefly until urged to study at Hieizan, the great Tendai monastery, which he gladly agreed to, as he revered its founding abbot, Saicho. Aged 31 and back in Awa, Nichiren attained enlightenment, sat on the slopes of a mountain, bathed in the rays of the rising sun. He chanted for the first time, Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, hail to the wonderful law of the Lotus Sutra. This didn't go down well in Awa. Of course, they do say prophets are never accepted in their homeland, so he fled to Kamakura. But he didn't stop espousing his new faith here. In fact, he ramped it up. Residing in a mountain hut at Matsubagayatsu, writing his thesis by night, and coming down the mountain in the morning and proclaiming his thesis on street corners by day. In a time of drought, famine, earthquakes, floods, typhoons, especially severe, which Nichiren asserted was divine retribution for wrong-headed beliefs and practice.
The path to the Pure Land is a highway to hell. The chants of Zen are a demon's damned yell. The Shingon true word is naught but a lie. And if this land follows the Ritsu, we're all doomed to die. Naturally, the political and religious authorities weren't too impressed with this fellow. But ordinary people thought he was great. They'd never seen anything like this before. Fire and brimstone from a Buddhist. For much of Buddhism's history in Japan, different denominations have gotten along harmoniously. Here, at Jokomyo Ji Temple, members of the Shingon, Tendai, Zen and Jodo Pure Land sects came together to study at the Buddhist Academy. But with Nichiren, that harmony was compromised for the first time. You might wonder, given the atmosphere of the era, when anyone who caused too much of a fuss was likely to suffer the executioner's sword or the rocks and torches of rival factions, did he manage to survive? Well, in regard to the executioners and rock-wielding, sword-holding, torch-bearing members of rival factions, it wasn't for want of trying.
One night, Nichiren was sitting in his hut on Matsubagayatsu mountain, writing his thesis for the benefit of the nation, when he heard noises in the valley below. So he looked down and he saw throngs of people coming up the mountain, carrying staffs and torches and making angry noises, and he was terrified. But at that moment, a white ape appeared and led Nichiren to safety. The angry mob, of course, burnt his hut, but at least Nichiren survived. Another time, when the shogunate had got tired of Nichiren's angry rantings and criticisms of the government, they decided to exile him to the Izu Peninsula. But the men charged with carrying him by boat to Izu must have been tired of his ranting too, because they cut him adrift on a rock in the middle of the ocean, presumably to die. But Nichiren's chanting of Namu Myoho Renge Kyo caught the attention of a passing fisherman, who rescued Nichiren and later became one of his disciples, building a temple. When I first came to live in Japan, I bought a Japanese guidebook, and I remember in the history section it described Nichiren as a bellicose character who was frequently booted into exile. If you're wondering why he was frequently booted into exile, it was for saying stuff like this.
I am the Lord and Master of the Sovereign, and of all Buddhists of all other schools.
They treat us maliciously. Why should they be blessed by the light of the sun and moon? Why should they be permitted to dwell on earth? The Mongols are coming to punish them, and because of them, this entire land will suffer from the wrath of the Mongols. And if this comes to pass, it will prove that I, Nichiren, know and speak the Lotus Sutra and the truth. For the Kamakura shogunate, Nichiren's threat of invasion was the last straw. He was arrested, tied and bound, strapped to a horse, and taken for trial to a site where Ryuko Ji Tmple now stands, and there he was sentenced to death.
Nichiren was thrown into this cave to await his execution. And when Nichiren was taken out of the cave to his place of execution, he bravely walked out to meet his fate.
What happened next was Nichiren's closest and most famous escape from a violent death. For as he knelt bravely, and as the executioner raised his sword, a bolt of lightning flew across from Enoshima Island, shattering the executioner's sword, and not a moment too soon. For then, a messenger arrived from the shogun's court, announcing that Nichiren's sentence had been commuted from death to exile on a remote island in the Japan Sea.